Hey everybody, I'm Zale Mednick and welcome to another episode of Preconceived. If you're enjoying these episodes, please rate and review it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever podcasting platform you listen to. It really helps spread word of the show and allow us to keep producing these episodes. We're also now publishing a lot of these episodes on our YouTube channel. So if you look up Preconceived Podcast on YouTube and you prefer to watch your podcast as opposed to listen to them, or you like a combination of both, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch the videos there. The search for romantic love is a journey many of us choose to go on. Phrases like finding the one and meant to be are common adages when one seeks to find the quote-unquote perfect partner. But as we know, life is not a fairy tale, nor is it a Hollywood rom-com. And the search for love didn't always look the same way as it does today. There was a time, not long ago, when romance and attraction didn't factor in as much in the decision to get married. Marriage was a more practical thing, not necessarily predicated on our idea of modern love. To many, that probably seems strange. But how strange is it? Is our conception of modern love a good thing, or does it ultimately set many of us up for disappointment? Can we learn from other communities where marriage is not based on love, where marriages are arranged, and love is perhaps something that is thought to develop after the two partners have been wed? Is that perhaps a more practical model for lasting love? I'm joined today by Pamela Regan, who's spoken about this topic. She's a social psychologist and statistician. She's particularly interested in aspects of sexual and romantic attraction, including sexual desire, passionate, companion. Her primary research interest is in the area of close relationships, specifically romantic relationships. She's particularly interested in attraction, desire, passion, love, and related phenomena. She approaches research questions from both a social, psychological, and evolutionary perspective. She's an active scientist and scholar and has published a number of peer-reviewed journal articles, chapters, and encyclopedia entries and books. Pamela Regan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to preface this by saying there's a dog on campus at your house. So if we hear some dog noises, that's okay. And Pamela was just telling me how much she loves, in the vein of love, how much she loves her dog and how much dogs have meant to her in her life. So just prefacing some barks.
Yes, there may be some noise because Kip is a social fella and he's fear of missing out. He really does.
Kip wants some love. So
he does.
Pamela, these topics are some of my favorite when we talk about love, especially in the realm of preconceived, which this podcast is all about, because it's it's natural to think about love in the way you've grown up to be taught about love. And I'm curious to start, how do you think most people look at love right now? When you think of modern love in the 21st century, what do you think of? How do you define that or describe that? Not necessarily what it should be, and there's no shoulds, but how that's perceived by most people.
I think that's a really great question. And I think if you ask a lot of people on the street, particularly in industrialized, sort of urban, Western populations, you will get an answer that really does resemble sort of the Hollywood romantic vision, that heavy on romance and passion and finding your soulmate and true love you'll know it when you find it, and it will be perfect and it will overcome all obstacles. And this is really what we call it's romanticism. It's the romantic ideal. And it's actually something that can be measured because some groups score higher on it than others. Teenage boys are particularly romantic, which is, I think, a quite lovely and interesting finding. But it also is fairly unrealistic. And yet I believe that is certainly what the media, and certainly because we are consumers of media, what I think a lot of us have come to accept and embrace as the way you love. That is what love is, when we know that there is no one right way to love. And there are, in fact, multiple ways of loving. And that's something that we don't really talk, I think, enough about.
I love that you kind of started there with the idea of multiple ways of loving. I was having a conversation with a couple friends recently, one of whom has been given different advice about her relationship and whether or not she should be in it, whether going back and forth on it. And one thing that I said to her, I came to realize a little later in life that advice in general is dangerous because when people give you advice, they're giving it from their perspective, right? And you often are told, like, I would give the advice to somebody that I would want to get myself. But when you describe multiple ways of loving, the reality is everybody's different. So what is viable for some person in terms of what love looks for them, that's based on their personality, and that might not be the right way for somebody else to love. And do you think that there's kind of this discordance that you've got some people who found it and they're telling the people in their lives, in addition to Hollywood, I found it, then you should, and anything less than that is settling?
Yes, I think so. I think that's such a really interesting point. And I think most of us, so I believe my own perspective has changed both as a person, as I've grown and had more relationships and come to different realizations, but also as a scientist, because I started my career really focusing on passionate love, which is that romantic experience. And that is sort of what we mean when we say I'm falling in love. It is a fall into love. It is a jumping off the cliff into love. And that was sort of where I worked with Ellen Burchide, who really founded the field of close relationship science and also was one of the first scientists to study that type of love. So my focus was very much on that. And it was really only over time as a researcher and also as a person that I realized not everyone experiences that. And when you give primacy to that, what you're saying is anyone who doesn't experience this is settling, is having a lesser than experience. And that is simply not true. That is simply not true. There are people who do not fall into love the way we think about falling into love. Our eyes met across the crowded room and I was struck by lightning and I knew he's the one, she's the one. Not everyone experiences that, and that's actually okay because that's probably fairly uncommon. So if you found it and you felt it, wonderful. You have experienced what we call passionate love or erotic love. You may be prone to experience that. My sister, classic erotic or passionate lover. Me, not so much. That's okay. I have friends who gradually came to realize that they were in love with this other person. They waded slowly into love. They didn't jump off the cliff, but they gradually, over time, intermingled their lives together and developed this deep, solid, friendship-based, respect-based, trust-based relationship. That is an equally valid way of loving. And it is no less valuable or viable. And in fact, it may be more predictive of relational well-being, quite frankly, than falling passionately, madly, crazy in love. Not everyone has to be crazy in love for it to be love. So I love that advice that you gave to your friend, which is, hey, what is good for one person is not necessarily good or true or accurate for another. And let's please stop giving primacy to one variety over another. Let's please stop doing that, because if you told me you won't be happy until you experience that lightning moment, I would think there was something wrong with my relationship or my approach or my way of being in romantic relationships. And there just isn't. I just don't love that way. I love in a different way. And that's okay. Probably what's most important is finding someone whose approach matches yours.
Mm. That's really, really eloquently said. To play devil's advocate, because I know there are people listening to this who might say, hey, but you said there's people who don't necessarily fall into love. Not everyone experiences that passionate or erotic love, like your sister, for example. Somebody who does experience it would say to the person who maybe doesn't experience it, well, that's because you haven't looked hard enough yet. That's because you got to keep looking. That means you haven't found it, because anybody can experience that if they look hard enough. That's not the way some people interact with other people, because the way they develop a connection is more slow, where it's less about that erotic love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would broaden it beyond personality, because the reality is we do have, not everyone has a characteristic approach to loving. And here I'm really talking about the theory that came to us from sociologist John Lee. And it's a very nice theory. It really doesn't capture all people, so I want to preface what I'm saying with that. But some people we know from research, and certainly my own research, have a characteristic way of thinking, feeling, acting, responding in their adult romantic relationships. And those people have what we call a love style or a love approach. And this really is almost a dispositional tendency, akin to something that might be thought of as a personality characteristic, although I typically don't like to use that because it makes it so intra-individual when we know that our understandings and approaches to love are also affected by our upbringing, by the culture in which we live, by the environment in which we live, and so on. But for those people who have a characteristic approach, research tells us that not when we administer the scales we have to assess these approaches, we know that not everyone shows erotic. Not everyone shows passionate love. There are sizable numbers of people whose approach is what we call companionate or storgic, which is an affection-based, calmer, I like to get to know someone for a bit before I enter a relationship with them. The passionate lover would never say that. They would say, oh no, I knew as soon as our eyes met, I knew. Different approaches, equally valid. And so I understand that the passionate lover might say, but you'll feel what I feel as soon as you find the right person. That in and of itself is a sign of a passionate lover because they are emotional. They are intense. They are comfortable with that. Not everyone is comfortable jumping off that cliff, and that's okay. And we all know that because we all have friends, we all have family members who are very emotionally expressive and others who are not. And being expressive versus being not, there's no value judgment placed on that. And so I understand the desire to say, but this is the right way. And it's so wonderful what I'm feeling that I want to give it to you. I want to share it with you. I want you to have that. But what it does is negate the reality and the value of the other person's experience, because they might turn around and equally say, but I'd like you to have what I have, which is this warm, comfortable experience that is strong and sturdy and weathers changes in desire and emotion and is sturdy, not fragile, because passionate love is fragile. It is that high cannot last forever. Doesn't mean you leave the relationship, doesn't mean you leave the partner, but haven't we all felt that? I have. Like, where did he walked in the room and my heart jumped. Where did that go? And is it wrong that it went? It's not wrong that it went. It's a function of physiological arousal and the fact that our bodies cannot sustain that high forever. So I understand what the passionate lovers want to share, and I think it's beautiful that they want to share that. But I also think we all need to acknowledge that there are different ways of loving, and how wonderful is that, this diversity of ways of finding true love. They're all true love. They're just different facets of it. It's beautiful.
And it sounds like that romantic love that you're talking about, that more erotic love, the one that we see in Hollywood, that is in many ways the minority in terms of how couples start out.
Maybe. I mean, what's really interesting to me, so I want to be careful not to, because I think, I hope everyone feels that, tastes it. I think all of us have tasted the different types of love, whether or not that's what we ultimately embrace for ourselves. I have certainly, I'm a little older now. I look back on my romantic relationships and I think, I have felt pure lust separate from love. And I'm so glad I did, because what a rush. I have fallen in love, and I have felt that experience. And I've also come to value a friendship-based, companionate-based love as well. What we find in terms of research is that, and certainly I have a student, Kate Boone, who just finished her thesis, and she looked at different styles of love, different approaches to loving. And what she found was not unexpected to me, which was that among our giant sample, we had almost 1,000 undergraduates ranging from 18 to 45. And what we found was that high numbers of them, I would say the majority of the sample, had both types of those two loves that we've been talking about. And there are others as well. There are other ways of loving, but they had high levels of passionate love for their partners. And they also had high levels of companionate love for their partners. And that we have found consistently across the last several decades as we look at sort of, and I would consider that modern research, last 20, 30 years. We see that among samples of partnered people, regardless of how they initially met and what the initial workings of their feelings and relationships were, by the time we have captured them in the lab, we see that they love both passionately and companionately. And I think that's wonderful because they essentially, what that's taught me is a very hopeful, kind of optimistic, it's given me a very hopeful, optimistic vision of modern romantic relationships, which is that for many, many people, they want and they are able to find both. They are able to find the passion, they are able to find the companionship and the friendship. And those, of course, I would argue are two equally valuable components of interpersonal happiness, at least romantically speaking. And that's really wonderful. So while there are probably sizable minorities of people who do not experience the lightning struck you, fall in love instantly, passionate experience, at least within the workings of their relationships, they feel that. They feel aspects of that. They feel the emotional intimacy, the emotional intensity, the desire, the chemistry, all those things that make up passionate love. And they also feel the trust, the affection, the respect, the companionship, the closeness, the bondedness that make up a more companionate, friendship-based love. And I think that's great. I think that's just wonderful. That's what people are telling us today they want, at least in our studies. I want the best of both. I want all of it. I want a friend, I want someone I can rely on, and I want the passion. And at least many of them are finding it.
In terms of wanting all of it, I know I've read before, I've read before, and I read.
Who doesn't want it all?
We all want it all. That's the problem. One of the themes that I got out of that was that we now feel like we should be finding someone who is able to provide everything for us, who not necessarily, I'm not even talking financially, I'm talking provide like every emotion that I think is important, provide all facets of love, be the person I have the serious conversation with, be the person that makes me laugh, be the person that I can cry with, be the person, you get the idea. And Esther Perel kind of pushes back on that and says, that's not how things used to be, and we're not really wired for that. Again, some people may be listening to this and say, yep, my partner does everything. But for many people, they would say, I've been looking for that, but when I read that book and Esther Perel kind of said that, it said, yeah, that's a good point. How can I expect one person to provide so many different emotions and tangible things to me? What's your take on that idea of kind of needing everything from one person? Do we put too much stock in that? And I know that's a loaded question, a bit leading.
It's a great question. And I absolutely agree that it's too much. It is too much to put on one person. And I do believe that I completely concur with her conclusion. Regardless of the mechanisms, I'm not going to make an evolutionary argument, although I am an evolutionary social psychologist. But the reality is, yes, we have sold people a bill of goods. We have told them that when you find the right person, that person will be everything to you. Best friend, parent, if you choose to have a family, to start a family, your confidant, your hobby partner, your sex partner, and the sex will be amazing all the time and never a chore and never need to be scheduled and always fulfilling. Will always be capable of nurturance, of giving you intimacy, will be your domestic partner and help you at home, will be your financial partner. That's a heck of a burden to put on one person. And I do not agree with it. I don't like it. I think that I also fell prey to that in my own life, sort of growing up like, oh, but I'm going to find the perfect person. And he, she, they is going to be the absolute, right, will complete me. Will not only be this perfect partner, but will make up for any deficiencies I have. No one can do that for you. You got to do that for yourself. And I think that in many ways, our sort of 1950s. And Lord, but the assumption was you would have a network of friends outside of that marriage who would take care of some of those other emotional needs, intimacy needs, and so on. That was in many ways, that part of those marriages was a very beneficial thing, because your partner can't always listen. Relationships are about give and take. They are about mutual interdependence, mutual influence. There cannot always be a giver and there cannot always be a taker. I mean, there can, but we would call it an imbalanced or unhealthy relationship. So you do need to have a network of others, and it can be family members, it can be children increasingly as they grow and become capable of being friends with their parents. It can be friends outside of the marriage, it can be pets, it can be hobbies, it can be work colleagues. We need other people. We cannot put all of our eggs in that one basket of the relationship partner, because it's a real burden. And I think it does those partners a disservice, and makes it very difficult for them to then also receive the support that they need.
And that burden's really highlighted when you reflect it on yourself and you think, could I provide that and be that to everybody, right? Because I sure as hell know I couldn't be all those things to one person.
I can't. And so I really like the idea of just saying, hey, let's give each other a break. That is the core of any lasting relationship. So if you have found someone who you fundamentally like being around, that is fabulous. But there are so many other wonderful things in your relationship. Stay. Talk with your other friends about, there are some things we don't want to talk with our partners about. I am very emotionally expressive, as you probably have gathered just from talking with me. And I know that it is shocking to my partner, who is a much more reticent person. He is a shy person about intimate things, emotional things, sexual things. I have to respect that. So I have a group of girlfriends. I try to respect that. And I have a group of girlfriends I talk with about some of those things, because I love this person, and part of loving someone is also respecting their boundaries and compromising. So, in my perfect relationship is me and my dog. Seriously.
Yeah.
I love him, and my partner has said to me, if the two of us were drowning, I'm not even going to ever ask that question to you, because I know you'd go for the dog. And I said, absolutely, you can swim. Good job, you're on your own. And I make no apologies for that, and I don't feel bad about it, and because that's me, and I have someone who loves me for me, and I love him for him, and I have to be willing to compromise and accept those things about him. And so my hope for modern relationships is that we if you have a really good, strong relationship, and there's one area that you think, I really wish my partner would do more of that, or I could rely on my partner more in that area. Please talk with each other, see what you can work out and compromise. But unless it's one of your deal breakers, stick around for a bit and remember that there are other people in your life, hopefully, who can fulfill that role. Because we're meant to have intimates, not just one, but small group living. That's really what we were evolved for. Small group living.
You went back to the 1950s there, reluctantly.
Very reluctantly, very reluctantly.
But I want to go back a little further and acknowledging that this also exists today. And I encountered your work when I came across an article about arranged marriage. And that still exists, obviously, in some societies.
yes.
It's quite prevalent. I want you to talk to me a little bit about that, because to many people, it seems, I mean, I think it's a useful comparator to modern love. To many people, they would say that's just bizarre, obviously, because it's not our status quo. It's not our preconception of what's normal.
That's a really good question. And I do want to sort of preface this with some caveats, because much of what we know about modern arranged marriage, and it does still occur, it absolutely does still occur, is from people who are able to and willing to participate in our studies. And so what you typically get, and this was true for me and for my students, Saloni Lockenpaul, who is Indian herself, and my student Carlos Anguiono, we really had a sample of highly educated, urban, living in a Western society group of people who had entered into, chosen to use an arranged marriage sort of system for finding their spouses. So I really do believe that arranged marriage that occurs between equal status partners who are educated, who have these broad similarities, may look very different from the kinds of arranged marriages that occur between individuals of unequal social status, rural, poor, highly gendered and patriarchal societies. Very, very different dynamics. So it's really important that we not overinterpret the findings from my research and from the other few people who have been able to examine contemporary arranged marriages, because I'm guessing that the dynamics and the outcomes of arranged marriages in rural Pakistan, in rural Afghanistan, both two places where arranged marriages still happen, those dynamics and outcomes are very different, because you typically have much younger girls, not women, girls, being wed to much older men. And that is a gendered, there's a huge imbalance there in terms of power and agency.
And there's an oppressiveness as well in some of those situations, which is not what you're talking about in
Absolutely not.
the arranged marriages of what you studied.
Yes, so I just want to make that really clear, because I think it's too easy to walk away from our research, which basically found very few differences between people who were in arranged marriages and people who were not in love marriage, people who are in free choice or love-based marriages, to walk away from that and say, so arranged marriage is a good thing. It really depends on the nature of the culture, the nature of the society, and do you have two partners who are of equal status and have an equal say in the process of matchmaking? So just something really important to keep in mind. But the other thing I would say, and I would remind all your viewers and listeners of this, because we often don't think about this, is that like so many things in nature and like so many things in our own lives, marriage itself is not a dichotomy. So it's not like there's arranged and free choice. It's a continuum when we really look at the nature of those two types of marriage. So in modern day arranged marriages among equals, you typically, elements of free choice, personal choice, mutual attraction creep in. They're there. They're there. And in a typical free choice, love-based marriage or relationship, there is also an element of choice, of not arrangement, but of social impact, social influence. So how many of you, and I would even ask you this, Zale, how many times have you had a relationship that just fizzled out because your friends, your parents hated the person? They just didn't like the person. That is parental influence. That is social influence. So none of us have relationships that are purely, this is what I want and only what I want, pure free choice. And none of us really have relationships that don't have some element of, well, I'm kind of attracted to that person. Yeah, I like that person. So there is an overlap. There is an overlap. And that's important to recognize, because oftentimes we think of free choice, we focus on the person, and we don't realize every relationship, every marriage exists in a sociocultural context.
Absolutely.
And that context has a big impact on us, and we're often not aware of it because we're very aware of our own feelings. So, just something to keep in mind.
What were some of the main findings from your studies on arranged marriages, understanding kind of how you defined arranged marriages and not extrapolating that to rural Pakistan?
Yes, absolutely. So what we did was we basically we were interested in sort of the key outcomes that a lot of us are interested in. How committed are these people to each other? How satisfied are they with their relationships and their partners? How much passionate love? How much of that romantic warmth and desire, how much of that do they have? And how much of that deep, companionate, affectionate-based type of love do they have? And I will admit, we didn't find what I thought we'd find. I thought, based on existing research and based on my own understanding of love and the science of love, I thought we'd find higher levels of commitment among the arranged marriage group, because these are marriages where people have gone in with their eyes wide open. They know who they're marrying. This is someone who's been vetted by their families, who this is forever. This is a committed, stable, this is someone I'm going to raise a family with, spend my life with, going to become part of my community,
A marriage
right?
kind of predicated on the ideas of stability.
Stability, compatibility, and so on. And we would call this pragmatic love if we were talking about a love style. And some people do have that as their natural approach to love. I'm looking for a compatible partner. So I thought we'd find more commitment because once you remove the element of, ooh, I'm only going to stay as long as I'm happy. I'm only going to stay as long as I feel the zing, right? The zazazoo. As long as I feel that, I'm going to stay. These people are committed. They should have higher levels of commitment because that's sort of stability. So I really thought that. I thought we might find higher levels of passionate love and sort of satisfaction among the love-based group. And we just didn't find that. We found that across the board. Now these were people who had been in there. We've controlled for the age of the people. We controlled for the age of the relationship because satisfaction, commitment, love, all those things decrease over time. And do not misunderstand what I'm saying, because my students always go, oh, when I say that. No. It just means that there's a high, and then there's a little bit of attenuation over time. And that's normal. It doesn't mean you're not in love, you're not committed, you're not satisfied. Things change over time. But we controlled for those time variables, and we still found no differences between our two sets of couples. They were all very high on all of our measures. Companionately and loving each other, passionately loving each other, very committed to each other and to the relationship, and very satisfied with the state of the relationship and with their partner, which was quite a little bit surprising to me, but also it made my heart happy as a person. So, because that's lovely. We did find some gender differences, but we found nothing with respect to the nature of marriage being the key variable that would pull differences, would create differences in those very important outcomes. And that's lovely. And it does suggest that, in line with what I said earlier, that many of our modern day relationships, whether they are cohabiting relationships or marital relationships, long-term romantic relationships, most people seem to be telling us that they do have much of what they are seeking. They have the passion and they have the companionship. They are finding it all. That's kind of nice, I think. I'm not unhappy with that finding.
Yeah, in terms of a practical takeaway there, I mean, I think of some people who've been looking for a really, really, really long time, and I'm certainly not suggesting anything, but you they could hear what you're saying and say, I've been really looking really hard. Well, maybe this arranged marriage thing teaches me something, that there's another way to find somebody, or the way I am looking for somebody is maybe through the wrong lens, because there's other people who have looked a completely different way and found the same endpoint that presumably I'm looking for. I don't know how that translates into real life, but I'm guessing there's some practical takeaway, or it feels like there's some practical takeaway there.
Sure. And I would say, since sort of the modern romantic Hollywood version of love is this typically between strangers who kind of connect through some random serendipitous event.
They meet on the train.
Exactly. They meet on a train. Whereas the reality is, most of our relationships, so think of your friendships, even think of your current romantic partners or former romantic partners. Most of those relationships that we have come out of the daily interactions and the people around us. Now, electronic dating, the internet, all of our apps that allow us to find people has sort of changed that landscape a bit, and I'm certainly aware of that. But in general, most of our true, deep, intimate relationships come out of the pool of available people we have around us. So you might meet someone at work, you might meet someone through a friend, you might meet someone if you have a hobby, if you belong to a church, if you belong to it, you go to the theater, whatever you will find people in your daily environment. And I would my practical advice is, if you are looking for love, keep your eyes open to those possibilities. Keep your heart open to those possibilities, because friends are one of the primary way people still meet. a romantic partner is through friends. Hey, I went to my friend's birthday party and there was this interesting person there. Or my friend actually set me up with this person. And certainly feel free to use those dating apps. Recognize that they don't promote the kind of getting to know. We tend to make quick snap judgments on them, which is not the best way to meet someone. But it can be. I mean, my own brother met his wife, long-term, very happy relationship through a dating app. And so don't be embarrassed. Use those if you want. Protect yourself and be careful. But use those tools that you have available. And your friends and family are often your best tools. And isn't that kind of an element of matchmaking? Isn't that kind of an element of arrangement? That's okay.
The other takeaway that I get from kind of the no distinctive differences between the two groups finding is that maybe give things a little more time when you're starting dating somebody, because people who are in an arranged marriage presumably don't necessarily have strong, I don't want to generalize, but they don't necessarily, it's not predicated on these strong feelings for one another, right? And often people go on dates and they say, I just didn't feel anything. But the fact that arranged marriages can work so much means, well, maybe you didn't feel anything on that first date, but the guy was nice, the woman was nice. Give it a little more time, go on a few more dates, because that's evidence that feelings and that compatibility can certainly grow.
Yeah, that is I'm so glad you said that, because that's such a beautiful point. We call it experiential salience. We are very aware of our feelings of attraction and our emotions. And it makes sense that we're aware because they are there, they're present, or they are not. Anyone who has tried to desire something they don't want to desire, I would love to desire squash. It is not going to happen. I don't like it. I ain't eating it. If I could control that, I would. But desire and attraction, these are hot experiences, right? Emotion is a hot experience. It requires physiological activation and arousal. And we're very aware of that. So we leave a first date and we think, oh, I just didn't feel any of those butterflies. I just wasn't attracted. Exactly what you said. And we often dismiss the encounter. We dismiss the person on the basis of that. Now listen, if there's no judgment here from me. I am not a should'er. I am not a you should. Nope. I do like to stay in my lane. But I love your point that there are other things that take time to develop. Things like intimacy, connection, closeness, bondedness, trust, respect. Those are all interpersonal processes that we experience, right? That we individually experience, but do take repeated contact. They take repeated interactions to develop. So maybe you didn't feel the zing, but unless the person was in some way harmful or negative to you, which get out. Don't stay in anything that is abusive, that is negative, that is harmful to you. But if the person was nice enough, if the person seemed good in other ways and other avenues, stick around for a bit maybe, just to see, because those other things can develop and feel good. And sometimes attraction can develop later. It's not always an instantaneous thing. And you may end up with someone who you really like and you really think is kind of funny and has some of those other qualities like humor and intelligence and compassion and good interpersonal communication skills and emotional stability and all these things that we also know are desirable qualities in a partner and promote relationship well-being and adjustment. So I like your advice. Stick around for a bit. If you can. You can.
Pamela, the last thing I want to ask you is probably the toughest question. A lot of people would define love as a feeling, and you've done a really good job of defining love in many different ways, and I certainly think that feeling and emotion is part of love, but how do you define it? Because I've heard people define it in some ways that are a little more broad than that, and perhaps a little bit more beneficial, like love is a choice. Love is action, in addition to a feeling. And there's so much pressure, as you said, in that first date or in general to feel a certain thing, to the point where people don't even know, what am I supposed to feel? And then there's that small segment of the population that says, you'll know when you know, you'll feel it when you feel it, right? And that's why I think it can be a little bit dangerous, is a little bit, um, I don't love that word, but
Yeah.
saying that love is just a feeling can be a little bit, for lack of a better word, dangerous, I'll say, but I don't love that word. How would you define love, and where do feelings fit in on that?
So love itself is a really global concept, and I would remind people that I don't have one definition of love, because I understand, based on research, and we have a ton of research on this, that love itself has multiple varieties. So it depends on the type of love we're talking about. There are some types of love. Infatuation can be considered a type of love, and infatuation is purely sort of heavily emotion based. You have it or you don't. And when it's gone, and you can't get it back. There's very little decision. There's very little cognition there. And that's okay, because for that type of love, that's really what it is. And I'm thinking here of research and theory by Bob Sternberg, who created a very elegant, I think, model of varieties of love, sort of a typology of love, where he essentially said there are all these different ingredients out there, and if you combine them in different amounts, you get these different kinds of love. And some kinds of love are filled with emotion, and that's really primarily what they are. Other types of love are filled with cognition, with what we call decision commitment, and that is a choice. I choose to be in this relationship. I have decided that I will be with you forever. Some types of love don't have as much of that, and it turns out passionate love doesn't either, because passionate love is primarily emotional. It is primarily physical chemistry, what I would call desire, attraction. And again, what the love may not be the same as the relationship itself, right? So I can be in a romantic relationship and have my feelings of passionate love and my desire and all the things that create the passionate part of it fade, but I have still, as an individual, said, no, this is my partner. I'm in it for the long haul. So we have to sort of tease apart the love part from the relationship part. But my answer to, what is love, is that it depends on the type of love we're talking about. And Sternberg himself said that sort of in many relationships, we do strive to attain all three. In many romantic relationships, we want the intimate emotional part, we want the decision commitment part, and we want the passion, physical chemistry, desire, lust part. And at any given time in that relationship, one of those three components may be more salient to us. We may be very aware of the passion. I think we are in our romantic relationships. I think we're very attuned to, I'm not feeling it for you right now. Is there something wrong with my relationship? And we're not even aware of just how intertwined and connected and committed we are to the other person. And I think the trick for us as people living our lives is to be as aware as we are of those three components, and to recognize that there are other things, other experiences, decisions, commitments, affection, respect, trust, that are under the surface of what is in the top of our cognitive bin, that we're not necessarily aware of. And we're placing so much primacy on, I don't lust for you anymore. There's something wrong with our relationship. Or I'm tired all the time because we got babies, and I'm not sleeping and you're not sleeping, and I just can't even stand to look at you right now, and I'm trying to work and I got papers due and I'm a student or I'm a boss or whatever. We're so aware of those things that we often don't give enough credit to those underlying other things, like the choice to be in this relationship, like the decision to stay with this person. Give credit to those things. Take time to give yourself a break and your partner a break and say, hey, I'm not feeling the drives right now. I'm not feeling the yearnings. I'm not feeling the passion, but boy, you're a good partner. I am committed to this relationship, and I will see it through. Because passion is a wave. It's not always going to be increasing. It's not always going to be highly present. Commitment itself, fluctuates over time. Doesn't mean you're going to leave, but these are processes that happen between partners, and they will wax and wane during the course of your relationship. That's normal. Conflict is normal. It's okay if it happens, right? I think we have a tendency to say we're either in love or not. I'm either committed or I'm not. No either ors here, right? Processes, a continuum that fluctuates. So give yourself time to experience those things. Recognize that they're there. How many times have we left a relationship, broken up with someone because we didn't feel it anymore, only to mourn the loss of the relationship, because what we weren't aware of was just how deeply connected we were and how much that relationship meant to us.
That idea of fluctuation is uh, so insightful. Feelings fluctuate, emotions fluctuate, commitment fluctuates, like you said, and just acknowledging those fluctuations can give you comfort that, hey, that doesn't mean that there needs to be a change here. That's just the way life is, and that's the way feelings and kind of our states are. Pamela, you have been such an incredible guest. I feel like you've just given an amazing relationship, love, free psychological session to everybody listening and watching this. And one thing you've done that's so great is I feel like you've just given permission and validation to a lot of people to, as you opened up with, to love differently. And I mean, we know the quote, I've used this before on the podcast, comparison is the enemy of happiness, but love is one of those things that everybody is always comparing because everybody's always talking about their relationships, which is fine. But I think you've done such a great job of illustrating, not only with stories and with your charisma, but also with research, that love is going to take different form for different people, and understanding that is so key. So Pamela, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people learn more about you? Any books that you've written that you want to direct people to?
Absolutely. I'm actually happy to provide you with the list if you like, but you can certainly Google me and find me. I've written 3 or 4 relationship books, a book on human sexuality, and another that was a monograph on desire, on lust. And I'm happy to provide links to you, and that you can link to this podcast if you choose.
And I will put those in the episode notes. Thank you so much, Pamela Regan, for joining me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I could talk about this all day. It's so much.
And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Preconceived. Have a great day.